The Forgotten Playroom. It started with an old key. I found it in a dusty, forgotten drawer of my grandmother's antique desk, an artifact from a bygone era that had stood in the corner of our attic for as long as I could remember. The key was small and intricately designed, its brass surface tarnished with age. For some reason, it fascinated me. That summer, my parents sent me to stay with my grandmother while they took a much-needed vacation. My grandmother's house was a sprawling Victorian mansion filled with winding corridors, hidden nooks, and mysterious rooms. The attic was my favorite place, a treasure trove of old books, discarded toys, and family heirlooms. The key had a tag attached to it, yellowed and brittle with age. Scrawled in an elegant, old-fashioned script were the words, "The Forgotten Playroom." Curiosity got the better of me. I had never heard of a playroom in the house before, and I knew every inch of it, or so I thought. I decided to find the door that matched the key. I started my search in the attic, the most logical place for a forgotten room. Hours passed as I combed through the maze of furniture and dusty boxes. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed something odd, a section of the wall that sounded hollow when I knocked on it. I ran my fingers along the wall, feeling for any irregularities. There, hidden behind a stack of old paintings, was a small, nearly invisible door. My heart raced with excitement and a hint of trepidation as I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and the door creaked open. The playroom was a time capsule from the past. It was filled with toys and furniture that looked as if they had not been touched in decades. A layer of dust covered everything, yet there was something strangely pristine about the room, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. The room was dimly lit by a single, small window covered in grime. Sunlight filtered through, casting an eerie glow over the room. I explored cautiously, noting the antique dolls, rocking horses, and miniature furniture. Everything looked handmade, crafted with meticulous care. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate dollhouse. It was a perfect replica of the very house I was in, down to the smallest detail. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, and I couldn't help but admire it. The dollhouse was fully furnished, with tiny figures positioned in various rooms, frozen in their activities. One figure caught my eye, a little girl, her porcelain face painted with a serene smile. She stood in a room that mirrored the very playroom I was in, staring out of a miniature window. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized the doll was looking directly at me. As I examined the dollhouse, I noticed something strange. The tiny figures were not static. They moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but no, they were definitely moving. The little girl had turned her head slightly, her eyes now following me. Panic welled up inside me. I backed away from the dollhouse, stumbling over an old toy chest. The lid flew open, revealing a collection of marionettes, their painted eyes staring lifelessly. I looked back at the dollhouse. The figures were now moving more noticeably, as if performing a macabre dance. A cold breeze swept through the room, carrying with it a whisper, soft and childlike. "Come play with us." The words sent chills down my spine. The dolls in the dollhouse were now moving towards the miniature door, the same door I had just unlocked in the attic. The little girl's voice echoed again, this time more insistent. "Come play with us forever." I turned to run, but the door I had entered through was no longer there. The room seemed to stretch and warp, the walls closing in on me. The whispering grew louder, now a chorus of children's voices, all chanting, "Come play with us." Desperation took hold. I grabbed the key, hoping it would somehow open another way out. As I turned back towards the dollhouse, I saw the little girl standing in front of it, her eyes now cold and malevolent. She held out her hand, beckoning me. "Come play with us," she whispered. Darkness enveloped the room, and the air grew thick with a sense of dread. The figures in the dollhouse were no longer confined to their miniature world. They were emerging, stepping into the playroom with me. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. I backed into a corner, clutching the key, my only link to the outside world. The little girl approached, her porcelain face cracking into a sinister grin. She reached out, her cold fingers brushing against my arm. In that moment, I knew the truth. The playroom was a trap, a place where the forgotten souls of children were imprisoned, their spirits bound to the toys that once brought them joy. The key had not unlocked a door to a hidden room, but to a realm of eternal play where time stood still and the innocent became the haunted. With a final, desperate cry, I thrust the key towards the little girl. A blinding light erupted, and the playroom dissolved into nothingness. I woke up in the attic, the key clutched tightly in my hand. The hidden door was gone, as if it had never existed. I never spoke of the playroom again, but I could still hear the whispers in the dark corners of my mind, calling me back to play. And I knew, deep down, that the forgotten playroom was still there, waiting for its next visitor, its next prisoner. Waiting for you. The silent scream. Every night, Emily heard the scream. It always started softly, like a distant wail carried on the wind, but it grew louder and more desperate as the minutes ticked by. She had moved into the old Victorian house a month ago, unaware of its dark history. The neighbors had been tight-lipped, merely offering polite smiles and nods. But one elderly woman had whispered a warning, "Be careful after dark." Emily thought it was superstition, until the screams began. Determined to uncover the source, she explored the house meticulously. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until she discovered the basement. The door was hidden behind a large bookcase, its hinges rusted and wood splintered. Descending the creaking stairs, Emily was enveloped in darkness. She fumbled for a light switch but found none. Her flashlight beam revealed old furniture, covered in dusty sheets and cobwebs that hung like curtains. Then she saw it, a small, dirt-encrusted door at the far end of the basement. The screams were louder here, almost unbearable. With trembling hands, she pried the door open. Inside was a cramped room, empty except for an old, full-length mirror, its surface marred by scratches. Emily approached it cautiously. As she looked into the mirror, she didn't see her reflection. Instead, she saw a young woman, her face contorted in terror, screaming silently. The woman's eyes locked onto Emily's, pleading. In that moment, Emily understood this was no ordinary mirror. It was a prison, holding the tormented soul of someone who had met a tragic end within these walls. Emily tried to step back, but her feet wouldn't move. She felt a cold grip around her ankles, pulling her closer to the mirror. Panic surged through her as she struggled, but the force was too strong. The last thing she saw was the woman's agonized face merging with her own reflection. When the new owners moved in a few months later, they found the house charming, albeit a bit eerie. The neighbors only smiled politely, offering no warnings. But as they settled in, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. And every night, they heard the distant, desperate scream of a young woman pleading for release from her mirrored prison. Whispers of the Forgotten Asylum. Every small town has its ghost stories, but the tale of the old Dunwich Asylum was more than just a story. It was a whispered legend, a shadow that hung over the town like a curse. The asylum had been closed for decades, its doors and windows boarded up, and the grounds overgrown with thick, tangled vines. But the building still stood, a decaying monument to the madness it once housed. No one knew why the asylum had been abandoned so suddenly. Some said it was because of budget cuts, while others whispered about darker things, about patients disappearing, about the doctors conducting unspeakable experiments, about the screams that echoed through the halls at night. Whatever the reason, the asylum had been left to rot, a forgotten relic of a dark past. One summer, a group of friends decided to explore the asylum. There were 4 of them: Mark, Lisa, Jenna, and Tom. They were thrill seekers, always looking for the next big adventure. They had heard the stories about Dunwich Asylum, but they didn't believe in ghosts. To them, it was just an old building, a place to explore and take some cool photos. They arrived at the asylum just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grounds. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sound of crickets filled the air. They climbed through a broken window and found themselves in the main hall. The floor was covered in dust, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper. The air was cold, and a sense of unease settled over them. They split up to explore, each taking a different wing of the building. Mark headed to the east wing, where the patients' rooms were. The doors were all closed, and he felt a chill as he walked down the hallway. He opened one of the doors and stepped inside. The room was small, with a single bed and a barred window. As he turned to leave, he thought he saw something move out of the corner of his eye. He turned back, but the room was empty. Lisa went to the West Wing, where the doctor's offices were. She found a dusty old desk with papers scattered across it. As she read through them, she felt a growing sense of dread. The papers detailed experiments that had been conducted on the patients, experiments that violated every ethical standard known to man, experiments that involved electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and other horrors. She felt sick to her stomach and quickly left the room. Jenna explored the basement, where the morgue was. The air was damp and musty, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the halls. She found the morgue and opened one of the drawers. Inside was a dusty old corpse, its face frozen in a look of terror. She quickly closed the drawer and backed away, her heart pounding. Tom went to the attic, where the storage rooms were. He found boxes of old medical supplies, rusty tools, and other forgotten relics. As he was looking through one of the boxes, he heard a noise behind him. He turned around, but there was nothing there. He shrugged it off and continued searching. Suddenly, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He spun around, but the attic was empty. As the night wore on, the friends regrouped in the main hall. They shared their experiences, each more unsettling than the last. They decided it was time to leave, but as they made their way to the window they had entered through, they found it boarded up. The boards hadn't been there when they arrived. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. They tried to find another way out, but every door and window was sealed tight. The air grew colder, and the sound of whispers filled the halls. The friends huddled together, their fear growing with each passing moment. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. The whispers grew louder, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. The friends clung to each other, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. Out of the darkness, figures began to appear. They were the patients of the asylum, their faces twisted in agony, their eyes empty and hollow. The friends screamed and tried to run, but the figures closed in, their cold hands grabbing at them. Mark felt a sharp pain in his head and collapsed to the floor. Lisa was dragged away, her screams echoing through the halls. Jenna tried to fight them off, but she was overwhelmed by the ghostly figures. Tom ran, but he didn't get far before he was tackled to the ground. The friends were never seen again. The townspeople searched the asylum, but they found no trace of them. The building was sealed off, and the stories of Dunwich Asylum became even darker. Some say you can still hear the screams of the friends if you listen closely at night. Others say the asylum is haunted by the spirits of the patients, forever trapped in their own personal hell. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. Dunwich Asylum is a place of madness and terror, a place where the living and the dead coexist, a place that should never be disturbed. And if you ever find yourself near the old asylum, remember this: some doors should never be opened, and some places should remain forgotten. For the ghosts of Dunwich Asylum are always watching, waiting for their next victim to join them in the darkness. The Midnight Caller. It was a quiet, uneventful evening when Sarah first heard the phone ring. She glanced at the clock. It was midnight. She hesitated before answering, a chill running down her spine. "Hello," she answered, her voice shaky. Silence. Then a faint, raspy whisper. "Don't go to sleep." Sarah's heart pounded. "Who is this?" she demanded, but there was no response. The line went dead. She tried to shrug it off, convincing herself it was a prank. She went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house made her jump. The hours ticked by slowly, and just as she began to drift off, the phone rang again. This time, the voice was clearer, and it sent a shiver through her entire body. "I'm in the house." Panicking, Sarah bolted up and checked every room, but she found nothing. She called the police, who arrived quickly but found no signs of an intruder. They assured her it was likely a cruel prank and left. The next morning, exhausted, Sarah decided to stay awake until morning. She sat on her couch, gripping a kitchen knife, her eyes darting to every shadow. The phone rang again at 3 a.m. Trembling, she answered it. "I'm right behind you." Sarah spun around, but no one was there. She felt a cold breath on her neck and turned back to see a figure looming over her, its eyes empty and hollow. She screamed, but no sound came out. The next morning, the police found Sarah's body on the couch. the phone still clutched in her hand. Her face was frozen in a look of sheer terror. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of an intruder. The only clue was the phone records, which showed a series of calls to her number, all coming from an untraceable source. To this day, no one knows who or what called Sarah that night. But locals say if you listen carefully at midnight, you might hear a phone ringing in the distance and a faint, whispering voice saying, "Don't go to sleep." And if you answer, you might just end up like Sarah, another victim of the midnight caller. The Whispering Woods. It all started with the whispering. At first, it was barely noticeable, a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the ancient oaks that surrounded our small town of Ravenwood. But as summer turned to autumn, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and unmistakably sinister. Ravenwood was nestled deep in the heart of the Whispering Woods, a dense forest that had stood for centuries. The townsfolk had long spun tales of strange occurrences within the forest, lost travelers, eerie sounds, and shadowy figures glimpsed between the trees, but most dismissed them as old wives' tales, stories to keep children from wandering too far. That is, until the year the whispers began. I had lived in Ravenwood all my life. My parents ran the local diner, and I spent my days helping out there or exploring the edges of the forest with my friends, Emma and Jake. We had always felt a strange connection to the woods, a pull that drew us in despite the warnings. But that year, the pull was stronger, almost irresistible. It was late October when we decided to venture deeper into the forest than we ever had before. The whispers had grown louder over the past few weeks, a cacophony that seemed to be calling to us specifically. Emma, always the daring one, suggested we follow the sounds to their source. Jake and I hesitated, but our curiosity got the better of us. We set out early one morning, the forest bathed in a cold, gray light. As we walked, the whispers seemed to guide us, growing louder and more distinct. They were no longer just indistinct murmurs, but fragmented sentences, urgent and pleading. Help us. Find us. Release us. The deeper we went, the darker the forest became. The trees grew taller and closer together, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. The air was thick with an oppressive, unnatural silence, broken only by the relentless whispers. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a massive, gnarled oak, its bark blackened and cracked as if it had been struck by lightning. The whispers seemed to emanate from the tree itself, vibrating through the ground and up into our bones. Emma, fearless as ever, approached the tree. As she reached out to touch its rough bark, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the clearing, and the whispers rose to a deafening roar. We watched in horror as the ground beneath Emma's feet split open, and skeletal hands clawed their way up from the earth, dragging her down into the darkness. Jake and I screamed, but our voices were drowned out by the howling wind and the cacophony of voices. We tried to grab Emma, to pull her back, but it was as if an invisible force was holding us back. In a matter of seconds, she was gone, the ground closing up as if she had never been there. We stood there, stunned and shaking, our minds struggling to comprehend what we had just witnessed. The whispers had quieted, now a low, mournful hum that seemed to resonate with our despair. "We need to leave," Jake said, his voice trembling. "Now." We turned and ran, stumbling through the undergrowth, branches clawing at our clothes and faces. The forest seemed to shift around us, the paths we had taken now unfamiliar and labyrinthine. It was as if the woods themselves were trying to trap us. After what felt like an eternity, we burst out of the forest and into the blinding light of day. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. When we finally made it back to town, we were met with disbelief and suspicion. The townsfolk refused to believe our story, insisting that Emma must have run away or gotten lost. But Jake and I knew the truth. The Whispering Woods had taken her. In the days that followed, the whispers grew fainter, as if sated by their latest victim. But they never truly went away. Jake and I rarely spoke about what had happened, but we both felt the weight of it, a lingering dread that haunted our every step. As the years passed, we drifted apart. Jake moved away, unable to bear living so close to the forest that had taken our friend. I stayed in Ravenwood, feeling an inexplicable need to uncover the truth about the Whispering Woods. I spent countless hours researching the history of the forest, digging through old records and forgotten tomes. What I discovered was a dark and twisted history, tales of ancient rituals and blood sacrifices meant to appease the spirits that dwelled within the woods. The whispers, it seemed, were the voices of those who had been sacrificed, their souls trapped in a never-ending torment. Driven by a need for closure, I ventured back into the forest alone. The whispers greeted me as an old friend, guiding me once more to the clearing and the ancient oak. This time, I was prepared. Armed with knowledge and determination, I performed a ritual I had found in one of the old texts, hoping to break the curse and release the trapped souls. As I chanted the ancient words, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with energy. I felt a surge of power, a connection to the spirits that had been bound to the forest for centuries. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The whispers fell silent, the oppressive weight lifted from the air. I stood alone in the clearing, the ancient oak now lifeless and still. I don't know if the spirits found peace, but I like to believe they did. The forest remains, its dark secrets buried beneath the soil. Ravenwood is still a quiet town, and life goes on much as it always has. But the memory of that fateful day lingers, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk just beyond the edge of the familiar. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles through the trees, I think I can still hear the faintest whisper, a lingering echo of the voices that once called out from the depths of the whispering woods. The watcher in the window. Every night, as the clock struck midnight, I saw him. It started a few weeks ago when I moved into my new apartment on the outskirts of town. My place was on the 3rd floor, and the building across the street was an old, abandoned office complex. The first time I noticed him, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. He stood in the window directly across from mine, a dark silhouette against the dim glow of the streetlights. At first, I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of a tall figure. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to shadows and overactive imagination. But as the nights went on, he remained, unmoving and unwavering. Curiosity turned to unease, and unease to fear. One night, I mustered the courage to shine a flashlight towards the window, hoping to reveal who or what was standing there. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on the figure. I froze. His face was pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. His mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, and he didn't flinch under the light. Instead, he raised a skeletal hand and pointed directly at me. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grip. I slammed the window shut and pulled the curtains tight, but the image of his face was burned into my mind. I couldn't sleep, my thoughts racing with questions and dread. The next morning, I decided to investigate the building. It had been abandoned for years, its entrance boarded up and covered in graffiti. Determined, I found a way in through a broken window and made my way to the floor opposite my apartment. Dust coated every surface, and the air was thick with decay. I navigated the maze of cubicles and offices, finally reaching the window where I had seen the figure. My stomach churned as I approached, expecting to find some trace of the man, but there was nothing, no footprints in the dust, no sign that anyone had been there. I stood in the empty room, my breath coming in short gasps. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? That night, I kept the curtains closed, but curiosity gnawed at me. Just before midnight, I peeked out through a small gap in the fabric. He was there, as always, watching and waiting. My blood ran cold. In a desperate attempt to rid myself of this nightmare, I called the police. They arrived quickly, but when I explained the situation, they seemed skeptical. Nonetheless, they agreed to check the building. I watched from my window as they searched the office complex. After what felt like an eternity, they returned and confirmed what I already knew. The building was empty. The officers left, leaving me alone with my terror. I closed the curtains again, my mind racing. Who was he? Why was he fixated on me? That night, I barely slept. When I finally drifted off, I was plagued by nightmares of the gaunt man and his hollow eyes. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Morning brought little comfort. I decided to leave the apartment for a few days, hoping distance would break whatever spell had been cast over me. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend across town, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. When I returned, I cautiously approached the window. I couldn't resist looking, even though I knew I shouldn't. My breath caught in my throat. The window was empty. He was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I turned away, a chill ran down my spine. There, on my bedroom wall, written in a dark, red substance, were the words, "I see you." And I realized, with a sinking dread, that he was never in the building across the street. He had been in my apartment all along.
In a small, secluded town, nestled between ancient, towering forests, there lived a girl named Clara. The town was quaint and peaceful, with cobblestone streets and old-fashioned lanterns that lit up the night. However, the townspeople held one peculiar superstition: never answer a call after midnight. Clara was a curious and intelligent girl, always questioning the odd customs and old wives' tales that the townspeople adhered to. She had heard the stories about the midnight calls since she was a child, how they were harbingers of doom, how those who answered would vanish, never to be seen again. But Clara never believed in such nonsense. One late autumn night, Clara was up late studying for an exam. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of her room, and the ancient oak trees cast long, twisted shadows across the floor. Midnight came and went, and Clara continued to study, her mind too focused to notice the time. Suddenly the phone rang. The sharp, jarring sound made Clara jump. She glanced at the clock, 12:17 a.m. Her heart skipped a beat. For a moment she hesitated, remembering the tales, but then she shook her head and laughed at her own foolishness. Picking up the phone, she answered, "Hello?" There was no response, just silence. Clara frowned and repeated, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Just as she was about to hang up, she heard it, a faint whisper, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably a voice. It was a child's voice, distant and echoing, as if carried by the wind. "Help me." Clara's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Help me, please," the voice repeated, growing fainter with each word. "Where are you? How can I help?" Clara's mind raced. Was this a prank? A cry for help? She needed to know. The line went dead. Clara sat there, clutching the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just a prank, some kids fooling around. But deep down, a gnawing fear took root. What if the stories were true? Over the next few days, Clara couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. She asked around, but no one had heard of any missing children or strange occurrences. Life in the town continued as usual, with the townspeople going about their daily routines. But then the dreams started. Each night, Clara dreamed of the forest. She wandered through the dark, tangled trees, the air thick with fog. She could hear whispers, the same child's voice calling out for help, leading her deeper into the woods. No matter how far she walked, she could never find the source of the voice. One evening, Clara decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a determination to uncover the truth, she ventured into the forest. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The trees seemed to close in around her, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. As she walked, Clara noticed something strange. The deeper she went, the quieter the forest became. The usual sounds of nocturnal creatures were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. Her footsteps echoed loudly, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. Hours passed, or so it seemed. Clara couldn't tell how long she had been walking, but she felt an inexplicable pull, drawing her deeper into the heart of the forest. Finally, she came to a clearing, bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an old, decrepit house, its windows shattered and its walls covered in ivy. The house seemed to beckon her, and Clara, against her better judgment, stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and decay. She called out, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. "Help me." The whisper was clearer now, coming from upstairs. Clara's heart raced as she climbed the creaking stairs. She followed the voice to a small, dimly lit room. Inside, she saw a figure, a little girl, no older than 7, with long, matted hair and eyes wide with fear. "Thank you for coming," the girl whispered. "You're the only one who can help me." Clara approached cautiously. "What happened to you?" "They took me," the girl said, her voice trembling. "They took me and others. We're trapped here." "Who took you?" Clara asked. But before the girl could answer, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the light. The temperature dropped, and Clara felt a presence, something ancient and malevolent. "You shouldn't have come," the girl said, her voice now filled with dread. "They know you're here." Suddenly, the door slammed shut. Clara turned, but the room was now pitch black. She could hear whispering, not just from the girl, but from many voices all around her. "Help us! Free us!" Clara felt a hand on her shoulder, but when she turned, there was no one there. Panic set in, and she stumbled back, searching for the door. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "They're coming." Clara finally found the doorknob and wrenched the door open, fleeing down the stairs and out of the house. She ran through the forest, branches clawing at her clothes and skin, the whispers following her. When she finally broke through the tree line and reached her home, she collapsed on the front porch, gasping for breath. She looked back at the forest, now silent and still. The next morning, Clara recounted her experience to the townspeople. Most dismissed her story as a dream or a figment of her imagination, but a few old-timers nodded knowingly and warned her to stay away from the forest. That night, Clara received another call. "Thank you for trying," the child's voice said, "but they won't let us go." Clara shivered and hung up, her mind racing. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't just leave those children trapped. The following night, Clara gathered supplies and set out for the forest once more. This time, she was prepared. She had researched old legends and found that the house was once home to a coven of witches who had been executed for their dark practices. It was said that their spirits still lingered, trapping any who dared to enter. Armed with this knowledge, Clara ventured back into the forest. As she approached the clearing, she felt the same sense of dread, but she steeled herself and pressed on. Inside the house, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than before. The whispers were louder, the air colder. Clara made her way to the room where she had seen the girl. "Clara!" The voice was familiar, but now it was filled with urgency. "You have to break the curse." "How?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "Find the book. Destroy it." Clara searched the room and found an old, leather-bound book hidden under the floorboards. The cover was inscribed with strange symbols, and the pages were filled with dark incantations. As Clara prepared to burn the book, the house shook violently. The spirits of the witches appeared, their faces twisted with rage. "Leave now or suffer our wrath," they hissed. Clara, her hands trembling, struck a match and set the book ablaze. The flames consumed the pages, and the witches screamed in agony, their forms dissipating into the air. The house began to crumble, and Clara fled, barely escaping as the structure collapsed behind her. The forest seemed to sigh in relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Clara never received another midnight call. The townspeople noticed a change in the forest. It was as if a dark cloud had been lifted. The old superstitions faded, and life returned to normal. But Clara would never forget the voices of the trapped children or the terror of that haunted house. She knew that some legends held a grain of truth and that some mysteries were better left unsolved. And though she never spoke of it again, she always remembered the lesson she had learned. Some calls should never be answered. Lila had always been fascinated by the old Victorian house her grandparents lived in. It was a sprawling, creaky place, filled with dusty antiques and hidden corners. But there was one place that had always been off-limits: the attic. Her grandparents had warned her never to go up there, saying it was dangerous and filled with old junk. One rainy afternoon, while her grandparents were napping, Lila's curiosity got the better of her. She climbed the narrow, winding stairs to the attic and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The attic was dimly lit by a single grimy window, casting long shadows over the cluttered space. Long-lost beauty. Unable to resist, Lila wiped away the grime with her sleeve and peered into the glass. At first, she saw only her reflection, slightly distorted by the age of the mirror. But then she noticed something strange. The reflection behind her wasn't the cluttered attic. It was a grand ballroom, filled with elegantly dressed people dancing to hauntingly beautiful music. Mesmerized, Lila watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fascination. She reached out to touch the mirror, and as her fingers brushed the glass, a cold hand shot out from the reflection, grabbing her wrist. Lila screamed, but no sound came out. The hand pulled her closer, and she felt herself being drawn into the mirror, the world around her fading into darkness. When Lila opened her eyes, she was standing in the ballroom she had seen in the mirror. The people around her continued to dance, their faces blank and lifeless. She tried to move, but her feet were rooted to the spot. Panic set in as she realized she was trapped. From the corner of her eye, Lila saw a figure approaching. It was a tall, shadowy man with hollow eyes and a sinister smile. He extended his hand to her, and though every instinct screamed at her to run, she found herself unable to resist. As she took his hand, the music grew louder, drowning out her thoughts. Thank you for watching. Have a good night of sleep and stay safe. Please consider subscribing. It is completely free.